All right, one more lecture, and then you'll have survived. Okay, so I'm going to show you some random things at the start, as is the usual story, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about happiness, and then I have this coda to the course on complexification in general. Okay, so I'll just give you sort of a kind of a fun, broad overview of the evolution of the universe. Okay, so right. So this popped up the other day. So recapture, I've talked a bit about socio-technical kind of computation, and one of the things that's been floating around is this brilliant thing was really created by, initially created by Luis von Ahn, who's at CMU, and is doing all this stuff with Duolingo now, trying to translate languages everywhere. So people learn new languages and translate things on the web. This is a very nice idea. But this sort of, so it was about helping machines, decode things they've scanned, right? So the Google Books project, you might come across a word, and the optical character recognition thing fails and spits the word out. And they moved this into this idea where you give people two words, and one is usually easier to kind of understand, and computers generated that. And the other one, which is messier looking, maybe it has a diphthong in it, it has some funny letters or something, is something that's stumped the computer. So you can actually lie about that one, right? You can kind of mess with it a little bit. Like, I'm not going to help you Google. But this has started to pop up now. So it's pictures of people's numbers on their houses. I saw one with a mailbox. This is, that's the roof. It might be hard to see, but that's the roof, and this is 2401. This is someone's house number. So I don't know who you're helping, actually. It's very unclear who you're helping with this, but it's kind of possibly Big Google, or, I don't know, someone who's, and you want to get into your website, so you're like, okay, it's whatever, and, Can you lie about that one? I think if you can understand, I think you could. I think it's possible. You could mess with that one. Because that's clearly the one they're trying to add on top. So that's bad behavior. It's kind of when it goes wrong. People. What else do we have? So this connects back to the voting story that we had, the superstars stuff. And I've always wondered about the data behind things like, say, the NFL, but other sports programs and kind of all sorts of things where there's books and writers and so on. Things where you should be able to quantify things reasonably well. So this is from the New York Times. They do very nice stuff with visualization, and data has become a big thing for them. They didn't realize it at the start, but they developed their own data team, and they work very hard on these visualizations. So this is you can play around with this as a threshold here that, and it's a somewhat, there's some measure of how players perform in the long term, right? It's a combination of a bunch of things. It doesn't involve salary. It's somewhat inscrutable. But, so you select the threshold, so you make it really a tough threshold, and then you get, this is the first round of the draft pick. And so you see these people do well, right? They're doing well. You're getting someone out of there who's doing well. And then, so Tom Brady is this, real anomaly. I mean, in the whole time, I mean, it's well known, right, of course. But it's I mean, in the end, you could say they do a pretty good job, right? I mean, it's not randomly distributed, and it's not weighted that way. The people are coming from the first round. But then there are these, these people out here these players out here that people completely miss. So that's a fun thing to play around with, and it really gets at that. I mean, you could quantify this in other ways to see what the what the probability is, what the accuracy is of the draft. And of course, there's all sorts of things like injury. And then there's the fact that you were picked in the last round, and you kind of know what happens to those players, and your belief is not probably as good as the belief of the guy who was picked first. So there's a lot of stuff going back and forth. Anyway, that's good. So we're going to be talking about happiness today. So this thing is going live actually at midday in 25 minutes, or exploding into flames. And all the tweets have been moved over. There's some interesting things happen over the weekend, but with the Vermont Advanced Computing Core, but it seems to be working. So this is something, you guys are welcome to come and explore this, and we're getting some press and so on. And it's a start, right? So it's a start. And I'll show you some more things today that connect into this guy. But so that's exciting. It's very exciting. All right. So it is about Twitter to start with. Did I get that right? Yep. the showcase piece we have to start with is Twitter. That's not the be-all, end-all at all, but it's a great data source now, and it correlates very well. It turns out that, and I'll show you that, our measure that we get from Twitter correlates well with other more standard ones, self-report or survey-based ones from Gallup and so on, and a few other kind of measurements as well that you might throw in. So it has that validity. It's also a great test because it's real time. We can get it down to minutes and perhaps seconds. You may have seen the other day that, I don't think I talked about this, that the AP's Twitter account was hacked. Did I mention that? Did we talk about it? It was hacked, and I mean, it's not clear yet, and maybe we won't get a full story about it, but I think it's people and computers were involved in what happened in the next 2 minutes, which is this big drop in the Dow, and belief somehow just shifted around in the US, and then it was back up once it was realized that it became clear that it was a hack. So if you didn't hear it, it was that it was from the AP. They were hacked by the Syrian Electronic Army, perhaps. They've claimed responsibility. Colbert said that he saw them play at some stadium 20 years ago or something. But anyway, so we're not quite sure. But it said that the White House had been bombed and Obama had been hurt, and that's what it said, breaking. So this was this, it was not an AP tweet. It's not an official tweet. So that really affected things. So that's a little bit of a concern. One tweet, take down the whole thing. Now there was some resilience, I suppose, we'd have to say. Anyway, so Twitter matters. So that's what I'm saying. I mean, the collective voice of Twitter is really now this big media piece. It wasn't in 2008, but it is now. So it's got a number of dimensions that make it very, very interesting, and that timescale, real-time aspect of it is a big deal. So, but of course, you could, in principle, put lots of things in here, but I'll talk about Twitter for a little bit here. This is to show you the kind of very minute-to-minute nature of, there are real people tweeting about things, and of course there'll be restaurants tweeting and other, Twitter is a melange of media and bots and humans, and it's a bit of a mess. So you can sort those things out to some extent, of course. But, okay, so this is, as a function of time of the day, this is just raw counts normalized so that you get a total of 100 or 1 going across per hour for the mentions of the word breakfast, and then lunch and dinner, right? So people love to talk about food. They love it. You post a picture on Facebook of your lovely dessert, and people will comment on it. You post something about, I don't know, something intellectual, and it's gone. But food, yes. I also eat food. All right, so this is just a sense that it's telling you about things that are happening in real time. This is another piece of this. So this is hungry, starving, food, eaten, chicken, all follow roughly the same trends. They have very different frequencies, and it's not shown here, but food and eat appear about the same amount, and then these guys are starving is something like 0.04, of that volume. But when you renormalize them, they follow the same kind of trajectory, right? So there's this, this is getting towards lunch, and then we're doing okay, and then we get hungry again. So pizza follows a different one, thirsty, those things, they follow different patterns. But so this is bad news for chicken, basically. Right. This was a goofy thing that we did. The high school student who, Tyler Gray, is now at MIT. He's a very smart kid, and we did a bunch of these things with him. You could just, so this is something that would never appear in the New York Times or other, respectable outlets. But people, these words, ha-ha and 3 and then 4 are very important. This gets out to be kind of a maniacal scientist sort of situation, right? It's not like, it's a little weird, yeah. And so these are pure ha-ha-has. There's a whole branch of mistakes as well, right? We have a couple of H's in the room. So Chris and I both did tweet a full 140 just to make sure that was out there. You have to concentrate. Yeah, and this is ridiculously a kind of a power law decay. But you see that with swearing, with people saying no or yes, or and they're able to convey a little more emotion with that, right? So it's it's an interesting thing to get at. And you do see these words, as I said. This one is a different one, but these guys they connote things are generally, that's a positive thing. They're viewed positively and they're used more or less. All right, so I've showed you what's now online. This is a version. We have a giant blow-up poster of it in the lab. And it's not online yet, but we do have these little pictures indicating the major events where the time series at least seems to jump. And so the overall thing is that you see generally, so there's 4th of July and of course Christmas and Valentine's Day. People are just saying those. Thanksgiving is very positive. And usually you get someone you're possibly thinking this, and it's possibly a reflection of your family. People will say, but no, Christmas is a terrible time, right? So, and you do see on Valentine's Day, you'll see, not all Valentines and love and things and friends and so on, but you also see lonely. You do see some words going the other way, right? So there's some stuff like that. That happens so Saturday has the same story with, generally it's full of good things, but you also see drunk and hangover and bored, right? So, we can kind of get that whole thing. It's not just one direction. But generally speaking, they're very predictable events. The only one that's not an annual event was the royal wedding, which of course was highly anticipated by all of you people, but people in general. So they're predictable things. The stuff that's negative is all shock, basically, right? So the deaths of celebrities. So Michael Jackson was a bad day. There's a little silver glove there. So that goes down. So actually, if you get the PDF of this, you can zoom in on all of these things. Yeah, it took about 3 years to make this figure. Sort of just repeated MATLAB scripting. So there are natural disasters, tsunamis, the tsunami in Japan, earthquakes and so on, they pop up. The earthquake on the East Coast gets a mention because it was a bit of a thing on Twitter, but not actually in physical space. A few deck chairs fell over. But we've talked about it a lot. There are the riots in London, the attacks in Norway, so there are terrorist attacks. There is the death of Osama bin Laden. And people will say, well, why is that negative? But it's through our very coarse measure, it's a very negative character, a very negative thing happened to a very negative character. So the feel of that is very different to a Christmas, right? Right. It's a complicated day. It's an emotionally very complicated day, and I think that's reflected in the sort of the word spectrum you see. And we're just giving this kind of one number here, but we have a way of blowing it out into the kind of the texture of that day, and it's a complicated day. So you do see celebration, you do see USA, so there are these positive words, but generally speaking, kind of a mess. So it's these these exogenous, unpredictable shocks that are going the other way. There is a bit of an overall downward trend now. That's a harder thing to be sure about, but demographics have certainly changed. Not just people, but also media and so on coming along. So that's something we need to work on later. Okay, so that's some blow up of it, but yes. Halloween, not so good, but Thanksgiving is a very nice holiday. So this is to give you some, I'll show you, but I'm going to skip through a little bit of this. I won't show you all of these slides, it's too much. But this is the bailout of the financial system. This is right back at the start. So you see these words, bailout, bill, down, failed, not. So sometimes you will see these little kind of, just structural words, not, no, so don't is in there. So you're seeing those things appearing more often, and that's bringing it down. There's less of these positive words, and there's a strong weekly signal, which I'll come back to, that you just have to kind of account for. Money's being mentioned, of course, in a bad way, but we're taking this, we're doing it in a context kind of free way, which we can deal with as well. But this is the rawest thing to start with. So that's why that's a bad day. It has a lifesaver. This is the royal wedding. So there's wedding and beautiful, kiss, prince, princess, dress, weekend, congrats, gorgeous, congratulations, kissed couple. So all these positive words, lots of negative words that are appearing less, and you see less of death and hate and so on. And those words are there because this is what we're doing is we're comparing it to the week after and the week before. That's just, you have to compare it to something. And 2 days after the wedding, you had the death of Osama bin Laden. So they're being compared. We could compare to different backgrounds, but that's just one way of doing it. So there's going to be less wedding on this day. So yeah, there it is, less wedding for some reason. There's less ha ha ha, right? I mean, that turns out to be a pretty, as I said, useful thing. There's less mom or mom because it's Mother's Day was adjacent to this as well. So, a butter bad, right. Right, okay, so I've told you about this thing. It is in fact launching in 15 minutes, hopefully. So we'll see if that works out. So lots of other little details in here that you can get at and explore in different ways. So this is the weekly cycle. So at least through, this is the end of 2010, if we take a patch and we looked at breaking this into different periods to see how robust it was, and it's pretty strong. It may be changing now. But Tuesday was the lowest day. And then it climbs out Wednesday, Thursday. Friday's pretty good. Saturday's great. Sunday's still doing all right. Monday's, you've really dropped, but it's Tuesday's because Monday you've still got some of the weekend. You're still able to talk about the good things. And then Tuesday you're in the middle of nowhere. Right. It's really a bad situation.
I feel like the headline is that the cure is wrong, actually.
The cure is totally wrong, yeah. Right. Was it Bob Geldof? I don't like Mondays?
Oh, I was thinking of Friday.
That's another one.
I was thinking of Friday of the month.
Anyway, but this is what people think, right? So in our Mechanical Turk survey, when we just have the words in there, right? Because they're frequently used words. So we just have the names of the week in there, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So we just looked at what people had rated them as. You can look at cities as well, people, right? Lots of things to look at. But Tuesday, so actually, yeah, it goes up, and Sunday is low. So the ordering is the same, but Monday is clearly the day that people, perceive to be bad. But in fact, this is the wrong day. Today's a sad day. This is the start, really, and it's obviously hard to see, but I'll point to some things. This is the start of understanding context. Because, of course, we did this very raw thing to start with. So what we did was we took 100 words that we just chose, and so there's some groupings, like summer and winter, cold and hot. We have Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart, and this is a while back, so we have Glenn Beck. We have George Bush, Sarah Palin was in there, Barack Obama, Lehman Brothers. And then we have a few other more basic, so church is in there, income, cash, coffee. And so what we did was we took all the tweets that had a mention of one of those words in them, put them all together, and then removed the word itself. So we took out coffee, and we looked at the words around it. Right? So you get the ambient the ambient happiness, if you like. And so a nice result is that correlates, actually. That correlates with the underlying, the happiness of the individual words in a nice way, right? So happy is typically surrounded, it might not be, right? It might be that there are neutral words essentially around them, but it goes up. So that gives you this possibility of, if you don't know a word's score, you can actually look at all the words around it, and if you have enough data, you can possibly impute or estimate what it might be. And you can also estimate how things are changing potentially as well, right? Words can change. So yeah, Colbert does well. We also measured information content, also does well there. But this is an ordering based on their ambient happiness. So happy does well, Christmas does well. Vegan is up there with lots of positive goodness around it, but as a word by itself, very neutral. Yeah, not so good. And the smiley faces are in there. There's a little smiley face up there, the one with the nose in there. There's the one with a wink, so that's a little further down. And then we get all the way down to the two bad smiley faces. Iraq and flu and Afghanistan and headache and drugs and gun and BP, the oil spill, they're all down there. Goldman Sachs is down there. So here's George Bush, Islam, Glenn Beck, hate, Pope, war, Muslim, sick, hell, Congress, Democrat, Obama. Kind of in the same box.
So you guys just
Andy.
picked these, right?
We just picked these, right? And so we've got some work now where we're doing it in a data-driven way, right? Where you're just taking, well, we take out 10,000 words, or yeah.
Okay, so what is the score? Like plus, so half plus 4.3. Take a word that's not in the data set, like Stephen Colbert's plus 0.126. He's the 21st.
Yeah, this is above the average. So above the average of the whole data set. So what's its relative difference? Yeah. So 0 means it's neutral relative to the background score. So it's a bit of a tweak on that. Yeah, so negative, when it's positive and negative means that it is actually shifting up above or below the average happiness level.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's lots of other details in here, but that's the, yeah, very amusing. Anyway, so this is really promising in terms of getting at context. Very, very hard thing to do, and we talked about getting at one single sentence is hard for people sometimes. So, all right, that's some fun. So this is a paper that's got a lot of press recently, Geography of Happiness. It's coming out in PLOS 1. Lewis Mitchell, who's a postdoc with us, has led this work, and we have some fun blog posts you can get to. But this is a, so the red means better, right? And so Hawaii actually is terrifically happy, and Mississippi and Louisiana. So this is for all the tweets from 1 year where we have geodata, which is about 1% of all tweets. 1% of all tweets, people, for whatever reason, will tell you where they are. So Google doesn't have to search for them. I guess it saves overhead. Right. Here is also my street address. Yeah, this was on the Today Show and all sorts of things where they had a lot of fun. But it appeared in a lot of local outlets as well, a lot of local news outlets. They just loved it because they got to talk about, so Rhode Island had this great sort of local TV thing where they're talking about how Rhode Island was sort of in the middle and complaining about Hawaii having beaches. And the lieutenant governor, I believe it is, of Louisiana is most upset about this. So there was a paper that appeared, and I'll show you some more. There's a paper that appeared a few years ago in Science that had an ordering that we generally very roughly agree with. I mean, it's not statistically very strong, but it's rough. But they had Louisiana at number 1, which they kind of defended a little bit in the paper. Because if you look at things like health and all sorts of characteristics, right? They're usually down the bottom. It's usually Minnesota, Vermont, and New Hampshire do quite well in a lot of things.
Is there any effect of tourists and if
yeah.
there is, can you tease them out? Look at people who've been there for a long time.
So absolutely right. So that's a harder thing to do, but I think it's possible and sort of ridiculous. But you can. So if someone's been if they're in Hawaii, you can just look at where they tweet in general, and you can see that they're coming from Iowa. So we also have some other work that I'll show quickly perhaps, which shows that the further people are away from home, the happier their tweets sound. And the people who travel more in general seem to have a happier tweet. Now you have to be careful with that, but that seems to be the case. So travel sites love that one. They love that one. Yeah, this ended up, there was a billboard in Times Square where they had this ridiculous ad for a couple of days about winning a vacation to Jamaica or something. Because the New York Post had this piece that said, I mentioned this earlier, they said that based on this study, they said that Times Square is the happiest place in New York City, which we never said in any way. And they made a graph, right? They just made a graph that just put a big smiley face on Times Square. I'm like, oh my God. There you go. Opinion charts. Good. Yeah, so, we have to be very careful, and we try very hard to not make a mess of it. But, Nevada, I'm not sure about Nevada. Utah generally does well in our studies, and of course, self-reported ones. That seems to be a pretty happy place. So you can look at different resolutions. There's Manhattan. You can look at blocks. And this is not published, but it's sort of a fun thing we ended up with just near the Hayden Planetarium in Central Park West, the sort of happiest place. So that was fun. You can order cities, and this changes over time, and it's something that, in fact, we now have it's not live yet, but that paper has a Twitter account associated with it. It's a paper that tweets, which is very exciting. So it'll tweet every day a little bit of information, and then it's saying which city was the happiest yesterday and which one was the saddest. So Napa, and this makes sense, and it could be a tourist, right? But they're saying good things when they're there, and Napa loves this. And there was a 2-minute bit on Ellen where they took off on this and pretended to be drunk in Napa and carry on, and had a lot of fun with that. So we did, we had 390 cities, and we had Beaumont, Texas at the bottom, and they were upset about that. We got all these emails, and I know I've talked about it a little bit, but we got these people saying, yeah, you're right, it really does suck. And then a few people chiming in saying, it is very close to the beach, only 1 hour away. They sort of felt like a little bit of...
I went to college near Lima, Ohio, and I can confirm that that's about right.
That's Glee, right? No.
Is that where Glee is?
Is that where Glee is near...
I went to college before Glee.
No, okay. It's okay. Glee should not exist, but I think, isn't that... And, it's okay. But... I think that's elevated in some way, yeah. All right. You can confirm. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so we get some, yeah, there was a local piece done on Waterbury, Connecticut, which I think ended up its 5th or 10th maybe in one of our other versions. And they're going out interviewing people, and people are just saying, yeah, it's terrible. And then they could just finish with visiting a chocolate factory. It's like, okay, let's just eat some chocolate, because that's a good word. And it was a chocolate factory, and they're like, so, okay. Max.
I can imagine it would be pretty likely that some of the words you might choose. So if I understand right, you just choose a word and say it's either like happy or sad to some degree, right?
Yeah, we do it. It's right. So it's not just plus or minus 1. It's on a scale.
Right. So could I could definitely imagine that based on things like dialect, culture,
Correct.
and age and stuff, somewhere that you might judge as happy might be sad,
Right.
or vice versa, or something. So have you guys, and obviously this is a hugely difficult thing to try to do. I can imagine if you try to think about error bars.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is part of it. And I'm not showing you that here, but it's hard because the thing is tunable actually, and the language can kind of change. That's a very hard thing to do. But we are adding different kinds. It does have a way of, we do have a way of changing the lens essentially, very much like a physical instrument. So I could talk to you about that later on. But you do see, what you do see is a lot more swearing. And you might say in some places that that's, I mean, certainly where I grew up, that was just how you talk to other people. But like this, how you said hello involved various swear words, right? And with a big smile on your face. But, it's probably a little erosive over time, I suppose. So it's, so you can look at the characteristics of it. You also see a number of other things, like the words. I think I have it here. Look, let me jump to this one. So, so average tweet length. You can look at those things too. So sort of the complexity of things coming out of places, that varies quite a bit. Sort of information content, you can see, let's see. I know I jumped. So this is you can see this is a mess, but this is this is just not happiness anymore. This is usage of the word cafe as a function of college degree. So we have all these demographics, right? We have 500 demographic elements for each city. So it's a very large piece. This is obesity. So we have obesity rates for regions. And these are the words that correlate in just usage. It's not about happiness anymore with obesity, right? They go up with obesity. So not so good for McDonald's. Budweiser, completely flat, no correlation. Yeah. But eat, wings, hungry, heartburn, and ham. What's that? So they're the ones that are significant, actually. There aren't so many that are food words that are significant. There are other ones you have to think about, but food words that are significant. Here you go. This is words that, this is not happiness anymore, there's words that correlate with obesity rates. That are significant and are food words, right? So we have heartburn is sitting in there. I mean, it's a little story, right? McDonald's, eat, wings, hungry, heartburn, ham. That's your day. That's the day. Okay. I shouldn't laugh about it. These are ones that go, this is interesting, these are ones that go against obesity. And so cafe, sushi, and you see a lot of alcohol actually, right? Mojitos in there, I think, somewhere, or maybe it's disappeared. Hashtag vegan. Chocolate, organic, tofu. I mean, obviously these people don't eat food. Brunch, I believe, used to be floating around in there. Did brunch disappear? Maybe it did. Where is it? Where's brunch? Okay, right, yeah. At least, I mean, there are different types of brunches, I guess, but generally speaking.
Is there any way to like normalize these? So you also would have like socioeconomic variables. For
Yes.
Can you normalize this?
Yeah, so we have all of, right. So there are 500 dimensions for each city. Right. And so we could get to that, yeah. And I won't go on about too much. But let me just go back and I'm floating around here a little bit. It's a lot to talk about. And I have to stop talking about it. So this is, validity test 30,000, right? So this is various measures compared to ours. So this is our happiness score for the 50 states. And so we've got the 50 states. It's for 2011. We've got all the tweets that we found in Louisiana and all the ones we found in Hawaii. And so this is something we can update, of course, month by month, day by day. So this is compared with the Gallup Well-Being Poll. So they're just they have different kinds of scores. So that's our score. Obviously, you could just rank them, but these are our scores. That's the Gallup poll is sort of on a 1 to 100. This is gun violence per capita. Right, number of deaths per 100,000 people. This is a composite peace index, which we could look up. This is a health score. And this is another composite kind of well-being score. And it's the one that was used in that science paper I was mentioning. That has Louisiana at number 1. So what you see generally is ours correlates with these. Of course, it anti-correlates with gun violence. So that's just a different thing. Our happiness score. It does well with the peace one. It does kind of okay with this other this composite well-being.
That's the behavioral risk factor.
What's that again?
Is that the behavioral risk factor score? Is that one?
Yeah. Okay, so, well, no, this one? Yeah, right. It's a composite of all sorts of things.
Yeah. It's just called that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I think infrastructure and all sorts of stuff are in there, right? Okay, yeah. It's a funny measure. I mean, it's a good, fair enough. It's this thing where we like to have one number, right? Let's fly a plane with one number in front of us. It's just a bad idea, I don't know. It helps, of course, as you kind of move up. Like, here's the score from that enormous system over there. Let's tell the congressman or woman that that thing is a 5 today, And really, that's problematic. So if you look, so it does pretty well, and there are lots of other things we can compare it to. This is that score from the one we were talking about here, the science paper. You can see it actually doesn't do so well with, red means not statistically significant correlation. Doesn't do well with the peace index or this health score. And the others seem to do okay with each other. So that's of course, this is done in real time, right? This is not being surveyed. So it's not to replace all these other things. You don't want to replace measures of gun violence with our measure. We don't want to do that. But we can start to see how these things go up and down, right? If mentions of McDonald's go up and down, does that, is that connected to it? I mean, there's just a lot to do over many years. It's very, it's a hard, messy business, but it basically feels like physics in the 1700s or 1800s, right? When you're instrumenting things, and you're like, I don't know what a magnetic field is, but this thing kind of moves a little bit when right? I mean, it's just sort of, we're making these things happen. Oh yeah, there's happiness in marriage. So this is a happiness score in marriage. Very messy, but it's a positive correlation. So that will make some people feel good about things, and maybe, I don't know. That's McDonald's versus obesity rate. Okay, lots of other things. Had this. I'm not going to show that. It's okay. This is so Morgan Frank, who's part of the Story Lab team, has a piece that's in review now at well, I won't say. And yeah, right. I mean, this is you can see the map of the U.S. It's just lighting up with tweets. Of course, you see people traveling along. Hopefully, they're not tweeting while they're driving, but I think they're stopped somewhere. They must be. They live there. So this is one of it. He has a number of findings coming out of this, and one of them is this. So radius of gyration is how much people move around, right? So you look at where they appear, and you get some average sense of that. And some people move a lot. They fly or whatever it is. And this, what we do, we've had to deal with this because their weather stations tweet, ambulances tweet, all sorts of things. Plants tweet. It's full of, there's stuff you have to kind of be very careful with. It's a bit messy. And that's, it's going up. So we have that people who move around seem to, and you have to, it's not causal, it's correlated. And it seems that people who, when the tweets that occur further away from home as well. So it's not just, you can travel and then your tweets might pick up. This is a composite of many people looking at how they move around. So this matches up very well with the work by Mata Gonzalez, and then later we have Bagro and some other characters who've done some nice work with mobile phone data, which is rough, right? Because it's this data that no one can actually get at because it's come from somewhere in Europe and it's been given to one group, the Barbazi lab, and no one knows what the company is, or they basically called him up and said, "We love your work. You should study our data." And so we don't know what the country is, or I mean, I guess you can find it out if you have the data in front of you. Basically, you see where the cities are and connect it. So. But this matches very well with this. There's sort of there's a home place, there's a workplace, and then there are all these other, there's a Zipf's law distribution in here for how frequently people visit their kind of the locales that they like to go to. And if you take everyone's movement pattern and then reorient it and overlay them, you get this kind of pattern. So this is human running around behavior. Very interesting. Lots of other things. So this is some older work. It's gotten messier now, but this is based on follower count. This is the happiness that in people's tweets. So there's a Dunbar number in here, right? So 150 is this Bob and Dunbar's idea of roughly when, it's now the Dunbar number of how many people we can kind of handle socially, right? So whales have a different number, and marmosets have a different number, and they've been studied, right? Other animals have been studied, and you have this kind of another one of these scaling things, right? You have families, and whales have pods, and so on. You can look at how those numbers scale out, and there's sort of a limit to what you can handle cognitively. So this seems, people have seen this in various ways. It's nice to see it in Twitter. Some work by Vesmaniani that finds a similar thing. So this is going from narrowcasting to broadcasting. Now you've got 1,000 people following you. The following thing has become messed up though, right? Because bots do it all the time. You can pay, if you want to be cool, you can pay someone X $1,000, just as they should, as is proper, to generate a whole bunch of followers for you out of thin air, right? Very dodgy behavior. And this is information, but this is an interesting one. So this is a measure of information as a function of follower count. Again, this is somewhat in the past, but it's maximizing around that kind of middle thing, right? So around that 150. I mean, this is 10 to 1,000 here. It's a big range, but interesting. So we'll see where that goes. So follower count has become a bit of a problematic, meaningless thing, unfortunately. You can get in there and look at how many times people tweet back and forth with each other and get a stronger sense of the social network. We've done that. Don't need to look at that. This is how people change as they go from very few followers to many followers. So this is the way their happiness goes up. It's okay, lots of things. This is interaction. So this is the number of links away. So you find people who have tweeted to each other back and forth, right? So there's some sense that they are, like if I'm tweeting to Oprah, I love your show today, and she's not replying to me, then I'm not in there. Our friendship doesn't exist in this. So it's not perceived by both parties. And so we true as it is, unfortunately. If only she understood. So let's see. So you can pull these networks out. You might want to do it a week scale, a month scale. A very tricky aspect of it. And this Catherine Bliss, who's part of our group and came through this course a few years ago, has some very nice work. So this is the correlation for people who are 1 step away, 2 steps away, 3 steps away in terms of their happiness. So you look at the tweets, you look at all their tweets, and everyone gets a little score. And you see if there's a correlation emotionally, what's the correlation length scale in the fabric, the social network. And so it seems to be there. There's work by others that seem to have this kind of similar story. So this is a long way out, actually, I have to say. 4 links away from you that's random, basically. You don't know who those people are. But if you're missing links, it could be that someone who's 2 links away from you is really your friend. We just don't see it. Someone who's 3 links away might be really 2. So that's a big problem with networks. We've talked about it. Getting to phrases, you saw that with Jake Williams. You get to talk about that, and there's a lot more stuff going on. But this is just from music lyrics, for example. So what are the kind of salient structures there? So la la la, that's good to see. But I know you, you know I, and I know. So there's a lot of that, right? That's not going to appear in the New York Times, right? But the music lyrics is a ton of this sort of. I mean, I didn't think no would appear, but there it is. Swearing is good. Okay. So we've got this thing. Finally, it's coming along. We'll add some other emotions. And I mentioned that the other day. Lots of input streams. We could get Google Trends in there. I think stuff from Bitly would be good. We will have, in fact, 13 languages. So we'll have 12 more. Yeah, there's just a lot more to do. We have to put geography on that site. That's going to be a big deal. People love that. They love, it's just basic human behavior. They love the comparative aspect. All right, so if you want to come back to that, there's lots of other links and things and so on. And we've had some nice press. This was a very nice piece in the New York Times a few years ago, early on, Peace and Science magazine. So, hard work, lots to do. I should say that work has been done in concert with MITRE Corporation, which is a not-for-profit governmental. They worked on radar. They were radar people actually, so they really like the radar thing. So early on, but they're now branching into things like financial disasters and so on. Sort of a national security situation. So RAND is sort of, so they're not, so that they wouldn't want it, but they're kind of in that realm. The Sandia and so on, I mean, there's a spectrum, but they're much more, I think they're much more, so your RAND is weapons building, right? Yeah. Yeah, and then of course, yeah, so I mean, there's a similar trajectory, I suppose you could say. Yeah, no, fair enough, yeah. They have different behaviors, let's say. Obviously, I won't exist tonight, but anyway. God. Well, the thing is, I've logged into it. Yeah, log in. You should. Did it just log in? Oh, okay. Didn't explode. Okay, that's good. That is a relief. Okay, so thank you for telling me that. Good. Okay. Anyway, it is just a start, and there's a lot more to do for that guy. All right, so let's finish this course. Thank God, finally. Oh, it's been fun. Okay. So I just have this piece at the end that I want to talk about complexification. Right. So this is this story that we've just, if we look, if you look at the history of everything, that's been a big story, right? Is that things have become more and more complex. Not necessarily out in space or anything, but locally there's this massive increase in complexification. I think we understand things, but we don't understand it quite as well as we will. We know some things about evolution. But we haven't quite got all of that sorted out. How quickly things work, right? What we get for free, what sort of games appear, essentially. All right, so these guys are still at it. So I'm going to talk about universality, symmetry breaking. We can go back to the start of this whole complex system story, what I call the big theory, and then just a couple of pieces to finish it off, right? So universality, we've been talking about it a lot, right? So this is this question of how generally applicable is this micro to macro story? If you tweak the microscopic details, will the macroscopic story change? And Leo Kadanoff, I'll point to him. He's one of the key characters here, and you can read about him, but he's a famous physicist at Chicago. He's done a lot of work coming out of physics, a lot of stuff about renormalization theory and so on. But we've talked about it through the course. So the central limit theorem, spectacular example, right? The details of those distributions don't matter. You just really need that the variance of the individual distributions that you're selecting from, and then you're summing the samples from, is finite, or generally speaking, right? So you end up with this fantastic formula, really quite spectacular, which is, amazingly integrable, and all sorts of good things come from it. And it's what you see. It's what you see in the real world. So this is a beautiful story, and we of course figured out that it's not really, it's a boring one. But in terms of the statistics of surprise that we see, the Navier-Stokes equations, right? You're going to derive them in whatever universe. These things just work, right? And it doesn't matter if it's honey or, I mean, it could have been that you need a special equation for honey, and you need a special equation for water, and a special equation for air. I mean, it just could have been. It turns out it's just parameters, right? So that you need to change the viscosity measure, right? That's what you do, and you use the same thing. So this is ridiculous, and I'll mention that, and I'll show you another piece of that, which is kind of strange. So phase transitions in StatMech. I mean, these are what I'm pointing to here are very hard stories that we know very well, and we can understand analytically. Where we can see that changing the details do not change the overall macroscopic flavor of things. We explored that with the rich gets richer story, which appears quite a bit, that it does have a kind of a fragility, not a fragility, but there's a tunability to it, so it doesn't have that super universality. And so basically you're right, so the details don't matter too much, and you get this many-to-one mapping, right? The micro is, lots of different micro stories are giving you the same macro ones. So that suggests this kind of bottleneck thing that's happening, right? So yeah, right, you evolve DNA and you've got all these other things and so on, but that was maybe just here, and you evolve something else on another planet, and eventually you end up with cities of organisms running around. Maybe they're distributed with Zipf's law and all sorts of things, right? So we need to figure that out eventually, like what's going on, with languages as well, right? We have all these different languages with a lot of similarities. You know, math is full of structure that just you will have to find over and over again. You have to find it. You know, the Pythagorean theorem, doesn't matter which universe you're in, you'll find it. So this is the idea of bottlenecking, right? That it's not just diversifying in all sorts of directions. And I know I'm speaking very, very generally, but it's fine. So that's what we need to, right? That's one part of this. How universal is universality? How likely is the state that we're in, the states that we might see in the long term? And fluid mechanics is this great example, right? Because we have the equation, right? We have the equations, and it applies to all. So it's absolutely a micro to macro story. We have experiment, theory, and simulations. And I want to possibly, I think I will play a little video. That's fun. A hilarious video from Science magazine. Doesn't sound right, does it? So lots of different fluids, right? I mean, some people will talk about the hydrodynamic properties of galaxies and so on, a little bit out there. But the stuff that's running around in you right now, the blood, oceans, atmosphere, the mantle, I mean, that's really absurd, right? You use the Navier-Stokes equation. I mean, you use different approximations, but no one runs around with a different story. So here's an odd one, and ball bearings on lattices, right? So you could actually do this too, and so this is an odd thing about universality. You can make up a different micro story that you might like better that'll give you the macro behavior that you're trying to model. So, so this is a 2D fluid, and so it turns out if you build a hexagonal lattice and have little ball bearings running around on it, and you give them rules for how they can bounce into each other, specific kinds of rules, so these guys have collided with each other, and then they're allowed to randomly go off in these two directions. Or if you have four colliding in this way, you're allowed to have that. A three-way collision can turn into this, and so on, right? So you build the right kind of micro rules. It's ridiculous because it's ball bearings, and it's a discrete time thing. Then you get the Navier-Stokes equations, and this is an odd thing. But then this is very useful because computers love this micro story, and we love computers, and they don't love it. So the lattice turns out to matter, and there's a beautiful thing about the hexagonal lattice that makes this work, and I'll just allude to that. But basically, if you have a nice hexagonal lattice in front of you and you try to squish it in different ways, it feels like a solid, right? You can't feel its microstructure. But if you have one that's, say, a square grid, you can shear it and so on. You can find that it's actually, even if you couldn't see it, you could see that, oh, okay, it's actually shaped like this underneath. So if you try to run these ball bearings on a square lattice, then you get the wrong thing. You don't get proper equations at the higher level. So it turns out that's only the hexagonal lattice that does it. It's a beautiful lattice, and I'll have some examples of that. There's no good lattice in 3D. Actually, you don't have a good regular lattice in 3D. So ridiculously, what people figured out is that 4D has a good lattice. So you do it in 4D and then project it down. Okay. So we're very smart and crazy people. So this is modeling a real thing. So of course you can play with the particles of a system to create the real thing, and maybe an easier micro story for you, which is a great result in itself. And of course, from an engineering perspective, then maybe you're also just trying to make new systems as well. So you're trying to make new things happen. That's fine. That's another piece altogether. But this, I think, is surprising. This is a surprising thing. So hexagons, I'm going to say hexagons are great. Right, so bees, they produce them. So a nice question is whether this is all done by plan, like bees are telling each other that your hexagon is not right, like you have to put it over there, or is it just something that happens because they're trying to squish things in? One of the sort of great, this polymath character, Darcy Wentworth Thompson, not everything that he wrote about has proved to be true, but it's quite it's a lot about optimality in biology. And it's really a beautiful treatise to explore, but you can get at that. If you haven't seen this, it's fantastic, really nice. Lots of beautiful drawings and structures, but all sorts of things in there. That's one piece. This is the Giant's Causeway, I should say, northeast of Ireland, and so it's just to say hexagons appear a lot is what I'm trying to say here. This is basalt, and it's a volcanic eruption that cooled, and they're actually columns. They're actually columns. Absolutely beautiful thing. So we see them. They appear for various good reasons. This is the same thing. And so graphene, this is one of the huge pieces that's being funded in Europe right now. It's one of the two flagship projects that they have. Lots of things can happen with this, right? So a new form of carbon, basically, and if we can do that, we'll have super suits or something. I don't know. We'll have all sorts of good things. This is chicken wire. This is from the Blues Brothers. I'm not sure if anyone has seen the Blues Brothers, but that was an important element in one of their first shows when they got back together. Both kinds of music, country and western. Anyway, so the bottles would hit here is really what the plan was there. All right, you should watch that. Okay, so cat lapping. So this is where, this is where fluid mechanics is now, right? They're doing the whole planes and all sorts of things, and we've got all that. We've got time to mention this, I suppose. So this is from the New York Times. It appeared in Science. So here is a cat lapping, for example. This is the milk. I'll show you the start of this. This is ridiculous. Well done, people. Where is it? Oh my God. Can you hear that? Is this the right one? Come on, volume. Ah. All right, let me reload that thing. Why would that not work? All right, if it doesn't work, you can check it out later on, but come on, thing. All right, so basically this guy on the right noticed his cat lapping at breakfast one morning and thought, that's interesting. And anyway, I guess the interview was just with them. I don't know what's wrong with it. So they thought, so they started to think about, well, how does that work? Because dogs make a mess, right? So dogs just kind of like bash it up in the air, but cats kind of create a column and then they gulp it. And so it's an interesting process. And there's some guys in the next lab were building something for the space station who had some leftover robot which they co-opted into making a lapping machine. And so they studied as a function of size of the animal essentially what the frequency of lapping would be. And then they went to YouTube videos and looked at cheetahs and big cats and measured things and so on, and they showed that the frequency of lapping goes down with size. I mean, it's absurd, but the point is that they got these three things together, right? They have the equations, they could actually do some analytic work, and they have a robot, so they do experiments and simulations, and they have good observational data. So fluid mechanics does this over and over again. It's like, oh, here we are, we've got those three things together again and again and again. And often, you're in new sciences, you just get the description part or the crazy theory part and so on. And those guys, and actually they can sometimes work very hard not to touch each other, right? Right, if you have a beautiful theory, you can't do it. Yeah, so that's a shame. Anyway, you guys should look at that one later on, that's fun. It does suggest that we've done a lot of fluid mechanics and we're probably moving on. But it's a great example of how those things work. All right, so that's about universality. Here's the piece that's going apart, against it is coming out of physics is symmetry breaking, right? So that you're not getting everything essentially as you go up through scales, right? We have DNA, we're all built out of that. We have a bunch of vertebrates running around, and we're just built on similar body plans, right? And it could have been something else potentially. I mean, you can argue about that. Maybe we should have 6 or 4 fingers, or maybe there's sort of an argument for why we have 5. So there's all that kind of stuff going on. But there are definitely some accidents of history, essentially. And this is a very important paper, and I've pointed to it early on, I suppose. But more is different was the nutshell, right? So narrative, hierarchy story, very nice. Good thing to reflect on. So he's a physicist, and he was saying, people, yes, I'm a physicist, I'm one of the team, but we are not the ones that are doing the only fundamental science, right? And so that was kind of a bias that people, everyone else is doing applied stuff, essentially. Some filthy, horrible things with theories, you know. They're working on the truth, everyone else is doing. But the thing is, if you have your you turn up with your grand unified theory of everything, you know, Stephen Hawking pops out with some stuff that, then it's not going to help, right? It's not going to explain dolphins, right? It's just not, or platypuses, you know, we're not going to get to those guys, right? So, and you know, it doesn't really matter we're made out of quarks, right? Fine, you know, no one says how many quarks were in your protein shake today, right? We break it down enough, but then there's a limit, you know, so maybe we should. Maybe we should market food based on its quark. All right. So, but this symmetry breaking story is that you know, accidents of history, you end up with these different kinds of laws and rules that apply at different scales. And you know, then there's this argument of whether those laws or rules would emerge, you know, through different kinds of trajectories through complexity. Fair enough. But essentially, you have to understand what they are for a particular game. You know, how do people interact with each other, right? And what are our kind of tendencies and so on, and how does that give rise to you know, global behavior? How do ants behave and so on? It doesn't really, we don't sit there thinking about their quarks, right? So he said, you know, stop it. And yeah, well, he's a famous guy. So there's a you know, a study on citations, which is a bit of a fun study, but the most creative physicist in the world, which was a measure of how much this guy's been cited versus how many times he cited other people. So within the sort of the whole structure of things, you know, really getting a lot of impact and not drawing on so much is kind of, which, you know, you're allowed to do if you're Einstein, for example, like cite no one. And he has this version of it, right? So science X obeys the laws of science Y. This is sort of a general thing. So the social sciences, you know, very roughly come from psychology, psychology from physiology. You could argue these things. Solid state comes from elementary particle physics. But this transition through here is not, it's not as if you just understand this and then you're set, right? Because there's some accidents of things that have happened. Not every possible shape is possible, or structure has appeared at the next level. And so he has some nice lines in there. So the more we know about fundamental laws, the less relevance they seem to have to the very real problems of the rest of science. So the theory of everything is kind of a theory of nothing, or disappointing, I suppose. So scale and complexity thwart the constructionist hypothesis. I mean, you're always doing a construction thing from micro to macro, but you have to start at these levels. So accidents of history and path dependence. Those words that path dependence is you'll hear these in different fields. They matter. Sornet, I've pointed to Sornet's work. So he equates renormalization with this hierarchy of Anderson, which is not quite right, because what Anderson's saying are there are different rules emerging in different kinds of games emerging as you go up through levels. So it's not a simple hierarchy at all, right? The rules are changing. Saying it again, right? So we have systems evolving. They have some stochastic path as to how that happens. And we need to understand what's inevitable or universal versus what's particular, right? What's special and accidental and so on. XKCD has a piece on this one. So this is sociologists, right? It's just applied psychology. So they can say that. Here's our person with an octopus. Psychology is just applied biology. Biology is just applied chemistry. I mean, people literally, right? Dirac said this. I mean, Dirac said, you know, well, maybe it was Rutherford, but a few of them have been attributed with this, that, you know, my theories explain all of chemistry, the rest is just stamp collecting. Right? Which is just applied physics. It's nice to be on the top. And this is a good point here. Mathematicians, oh, hey, I didn't see you guys all the way over there. And this is kind of true, actually. Pure mathematicians are in their own, there's a bubble. There's a bubble. You must stay in the bubble if you're a pure mathematician. Don't go out of the bubble. It's very hard. You can't get back in the bubble. So, because some of these guys will run around saying, well, they're the only ones working on real, true science, because all of these people just have models of things. Like the gravity, that's just a model. It's a horrible model. Reality's involved, you know. Yeah, we're happy with theories that are, you know, occasionally where we, as an applied mathematician, you will do this, you know, you end up with something where you can say it's your theory is inspired by, but in no way applicable to reality. But Ideally, for pure mathematicians, you don't want it to be inspired by reality at all. It is not inspired by reality, and certainly much less applicable. If it's applicable, it's an accident. I didn't mean it, which has happened, which does happen. All right, so this is a theory of anything, right? So it's not about just the small stuff. It's this increase of complexity, and we have these two things going against each other, accidents of history and universality. I know this is very high level, right? There's a bit of a problem coming out of physics is that we're just going to be a big soup, right, later on. So that's disappointing. We don't seem to be able to have a good story for why that's not going to be true. But we do see this rise of complexification locally. And this is something that's, I think, going to take a long time to figure out. There's a paper that just appeared that, you know, I mean, we'll see how it goes, but it's a nice story, which is that evolvability comes relatively for free. So even in systems, at least in this model, where there's not a competitive adaptive situation, evolvability is something that just kind of pops out, right? So that it's to do with organisms or things getting to new niches and so on early on, and the fact that they're just evolvable is sort of an accident of things. So there's that sort of stuff. I mean, we need to sort that sort of thing out. Like how much do we get for free? So I like to frame it like this. You'll see some people talk about big history, which is really a sort of a narrative of the universe, right? Big Bang, blah, 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 stars form, things like that, then the humans. But the big transitions, right? So if we have the Big Bang, I think, you know, yes, you have a big mess, basically, big randomness. At some point, we have to get to, well, we have big stars, right? We have those things form. But then eventually we get to big, what I would call big, I'm just going to say these words, big replicate, right? Things start to be able to copy each other. And then we get big life. And that's really the advent of algorithms, right? This is where we sort of start to pull ourselves out of raw, cold physics, where we've got some equations and you're a star and you're going to do these things, right? Burn, burn, burn. And then eventually we get some little guys doing crazy things that kind of start to go against physics a little bit, right? Raw physics. I mean, there's still obviously, you know, embodied things that you know, the physical laws apply to. It's just they start to do some kind of odd things, like starting to copy themselves. And then once you have life, so this is the advent of what I think. Algorithm is an interesting word. That only takes off in the 60s, really, if you look at, say, Google books. But it's a great, great word. It's a fantastic word. You know, thing, basically. Then once you've got life, you start to get games, right? You start to get evolution. And as I said, lots of things to understand. I mean, so when we get to humans and probably octopuses, we have big word and story. They're not social, that's a problem. Number, we have big God, you know, we have big make, so that's the Industrial Revolution. Big science, we have the big data thing we're going on with now, big algorithm and all these things, big connect. I don't know. So there's some chance that you get these transitions, right? Or you stay, you're Mars still, right? The rover is really eating it, I got to tell you. I mean, it's just reporting back that it's still horrifically red. There's nothing. Send me to Paris, people. Did I say that? Yeah, there should be a rover. We need comparison rovers on not just other planets, but ones on the Earth, right? We should have one in Paris. You know, tweeting that it found a delicious eclair. And the Mars rover is just like driven itself up into it. I'm turning off. I'm sick of it. Still red, people. Another shade of red discovered today. Yeah. Okay, so people have thought about this, of course. Why do things become more complex? Brian Arthur, who's a famous character from the Santa Fe Institute. I don't know. I'm just throwing these things up. Complexification, is it sort of the evolution of algorithms? Is that what's going on? I mean, eventually we kind of lift out of physics to some degree, and we really just have kind of pure algorithms running around. I mean, they're still running on hardware somewhere and so on, but we have algorithms talking to each other. Algorithms partly running the stock market, right? I mean, the algorithms are doing things. They're finding people to employ as software, people to make new algorithms. Algorithms are finding people to make new algorithms, right? And I like to sort of be silly about this and think that stories and algorithms are sort of the same thing. And so differential equations are kind of a hard kind of story. It's a cold story, you know. Yeah, life. All right. So the idea that life, in some ways, you know, there's old ideas that life is, you know, one test of life is if it's locally entropy reducing. Okay, fair enough. But I think if you can find some algorithms running around out in space, then that would be good. All about the algorithms. So the things that are, it's this march up through complexity, well, we had this big, this is madness. We have to understand that, obviously. But eventually, through random sorting, you somehow start to get to these replicating structures. And then you have evolution, right? Evolution is sort of just always going to come about. We're always going to get these games played between initially, replicating things, and then they start to form teams, and you get that big expansion out through groups, right? Which is anathema to biologists, I suppose, but group selection is clearly a big deal. Dawkins, you will go to hell. So technological evolution, socio-cultural evolution, we have those things going on, and then we have everything joined together. So, this is where we started. Now we're kind of ramping through all of this. So more and more complexity. Of course, we could blow it all up. All right, so just a couple more slides. So this is, doesn't come up very well, I suppose, but 3 frames for complexity, right? There's this sort of theory of anything, like why we move up through these scales, which we'll have better and better stories about that as we go on. But then we have this realm where we really understand things incredibly well, like differential equations for, as I said, fluid mechanics for all sorts of physical processes, statistical mechanics. These are hard. We get these are hard stories. We get out universality from that. And these are the so-called kind of hard sciences. And they all have emergence in them, right? This idea that micro to macro, the macro is different. And then we get out to sort of these soft and squishy sciences where it's more conceptual. But we know this is going on, right? There's some emergence of some macro behavior, and it's harder to measure, harder to describe. We're moving out into that. And generally speaking, right, the whole is different from the sum of the parts is a story that's going all the way through here. All right, that's a fun thing. So stories, I like stories a lot. You've seen this picture, I guess, in another piece. But homo narrativus, right? I think we're storytellers. We can argue about it. So random numbers, we tend to turn them into stories. And so, right, all of these things I like to kind of put in the same box. If you look at this comic, the rollover is also all financial analysis and more directly Dungeons and Dragons, quite. That's how it works. So I like this guy, Pratchett. He's kind of a good fellow. So famous English writer, if you haven't come across him. Yeah, he lives on a small island off the coast of France, which is called England. So very, very, very funny guy. So and just a lot of great stuff in here. A lot of great stuff. So he has this. If you don't know about it, there's the disk world, right? Is this disk that's living on 4 elephants, which is on top of a giant space turtle going through the universe, right? And then he has everything play out on top of this. And it's so if you know Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, then this guy is sort of the next version of that, but it's in the fantasy world. So of course, it's all about us and people, but it's beautifully written, a lot of fun. So the most common element on the desk, although not included in the list of the standard 5, earth, fire, air, water, and the element of surprise, very funny. It ensures that everything runs properly as a story, right? A little narrativium goes a long way. Simpler the story, the better you understand it. Storytelling is the opposite of reductionism. 26 letters and some rules of grammar are no story at all. And heroes only win when outnumbered, and things which have a 1 in a million chance of succeeding often do so, right? I mean, this is sort of how stories for humans run. So we're making a mess of things like fluid mechanics type stories, but they're our stories. They're the ones we like. They're the ones we write about. All right, so I had a little piece just to finish. So this is, I was going to recompile this, I guess, but this is science now, I think. I mean, and there's optional could be added to this. I thought it was in there. So, find things, you're all doing it. Find interesting things to work on. And this, optionally involving spectacular amounts of data, but that's becoming less optional in some fields. It's just there. So, you have to be kind of obnoxious eventually to ignore it. You can certainly work on whole scales for sure. And this is hard to kind of get across, but describe what you see and explain it. That's actually, that's fine, right? So people seem to go off into different parts of what you could do, like just make up theories, or they just describe all the time, which is, good, and you're part of the team there. But, the whole scientific process is all of this. I mean, you certainly see people, they become enamored with their instrument, and I'm, potentially in danger of it. But that's not what we're doing. And they can't tell you what it's for. Like, they sort of end up not being able to even give you a nutshell of why this is a good thing. You know, right? So we're able to measure DNA in this way, and this way, and this way, and they're so absorbed in it, which is fine. They sort of forget the bigger picture. Anyway. This happens a lot. I mean, it's surprising to me, but it does happen a lot. So you'll see these things. You know, I've talked about scale-free networks and small world networks and rich gets richer models. These big things that I think are important, but you know, you have to really every time look at systems for what they are, and it's remarkable how much of the following we do in the scientific literature.
Can we say that description is about the structure and simulation about the dynamics?
The description, so in a way, it's all description. I mean, if you have a theoretical model that describes the dynamics of a thing, that's still description, right? I mean, in a way, I mean, you could just say science is describing. Like, you could, if you wanted to. And scribe is a good word. Script is a good word. But I separated it out. All right, so we're finished. This is the next business for this course. You know, if you have any appetite, we go into things a little more deeply. So it's complex networks. But we certainly touched on these fields, and we would sort of build out from there wherever we touch on them again. But if you've seen branching networks, redistribution networks, this is really terrific stuff. Some beautiful stories there. Structure detection, absolutely massive, massive field. There's more things we can do in contagion. We love random networks, so we can keep talking about those. Things about organizational networks. More and more things about scale-free and so on. And more. But there's a lot more in there, and it's sort of such an enormous field. But it's more specifically about networks. So I think that's it. You're free to go, except you have to come back and give your lectures, so your talks. Thursday? Is that right? It's a Thursday? Next Tuesday. Thank you. I can't remember what my name is, but next Tuesday. All right, so you know. We'll have more emails about that. Anyway, so thank you very much, and we're good. All right. You can run away.